We acknowledge the first Australians as the traditional custodians of the continent, whose culture is the oldest living culture in human history. We pay our respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and we respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land. We extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. They share the memories, traditions and hopes of the traditional ancestors with the new generations today and in the future. We would also like to thank them for looking after this land for thousands of years.
Good afternoon and welcome once again to SciFest 2022. We're very excited to have you all here this afternoon for a great session from Sydney Living Museums called Cooking Up the Past. So when we think about science, we can't always think about things that are happening now. Thinking about the past, how we learn from the past is also really important. So I'm going to hand over to Naomi here, who'll be presenting with us today. And once again, a big thank you to Inspiring Australia New South Wales for letting us do all of these sessions for free for National Science Week. So welcome, Naomi. Happy to have you here and very excited to listen to the session today.
Thank you so much, Karen, and welcome everyone to SciFest 2022. My name is Naomi Manning and I work for Sydney Living Museums. And this afternoon we're going to do this program, as Karen said, called Cooking Up the Past. So technology has changed the way we operate in our houses enormously in the last 160 years. So today we're going to cross back to what it was like in the past 160 years ago at Vaucluse House. So I'm just going to share with you a screen and we're going to have a look at what Vaucluse House looked like. So okay, so here we have Zoe. I will come back to that later, but let's start with this. We're talking about cooking up the past at Vaucluse House today. Now here we can see Vaucluse House in the past. So this is actually Sydney Harbour on the eastern suburbs. This is 160 years ago. And can you see that house there at the edge of Sydney Harbour in the eastern suburbs? So you can see Vaucluse House is quite close to the water, quite close to Sydney Harbour. But unlike our houses today, there are not many other houses surrounding it, and they don't have any shops nearby. So the Wentworth family had to live in a very different way from the way we live today. Today, of course, the house looks like this, and we run Vaucluse House, the Wentworth's home, as a museum. And this is the man who owned the house. This is William Wentworth. Here is a picture of him. And he, in fact, had a lot of children living in the home with him. So I don't know if you want to put it in the chat. How many kids do you think William Wentworth might have had? Let me have a look in the chat. Does anyone want to put some ideas? 7, that's a very good guess, Emmanuel. 7 is a very good guess. I think some of you actually know Emily and Oliver and a few others are guessing, and Bernie guessing 10, Loda 10, that's correct. In fact, you're right, William Wentworth and his wife Sarah had 10 children, whereas today the average is about 2 children. In the past, families had a lot more children. So in fact, William Wentworth at 10 was that was reasonably common to have that many kids. So here are 3 of the kids that he had that lived in the house. These are 3 of his girls, Edith, Eliza and Laura. And in fact, 160 years ago, Laura was maybe a lot of your age. Laura was 10 years old 160 years ago. Now, the Wentworths also in that home that I showed you in this house had 40 servants. So there were 40 servants plus 10 kids plus the mum and the dad. And today we're going to talk about how, without the invention of electricity, how did they still feed everyone in the house? The questions we're going to ask are, where did they get food from, living or they're out by themselves in Vaucluse. How were their kitchens different from today, and how did they store food? And then at the end of the session, I'm going to show you how you can make butter at home with no electricity, no machinery. How can you just do that yourself as a little experiment at home? So here is my friend Zoe using that. Now, firstly, we're going to ask that question, what was the kitchen like? And there's a very beautiful kitchen at Vaucluse House. So you're going to cross and have a look at this video. And this is a question I'm going to talk to you about after. I want you to ask yourselves this: what objects can you see here in the Vaucluse House kitchen? So this is a very short video, only a few minutes.
Welcome to the Vaucluse House kitchen. Now, this kitchen is 160 years old. So there's lots of things that we can see around us that show how food and cooking was different from today, and in some ways the same. Firstly, you might notice that the Wentworth's kitchen is quite dark. Now, unlike today, where we just flick a switch and we have an electric light, 160 years ago, electricity hasn't been invented yet. So there are a number of ways that the Wentworths got light into their kitchen. Firstly, of course, like today, they had windows. Another thing you might be able to see in front of me here on the table, have some of you noticed this, the candle? Now, candles could be used after the sun goes down, but people had to make candles themselves. So the Wentworth servants would have made them out of beeswax, or maybe they would have used a mould like this one, and they would have heated animal fat and poured it in and hung the wick down, so they made candles themselves. Another thing that we have in this kitchen is the fire over here. Now, the fire would have been on all day, so this would have been a very hot room, and a number of things happened on the fire. They would have cooked loaves of bread in the stove, and on top of the stove they would have boiled water in a copper kettle, and they would have cooked meals in copper saucepans. A lot of wood would have needed to be gathered and split to keep this fire going all day long. Now, what's missing from the kitchen? One thing we can't see is a fridge. Now, without electricity, of course, there is no fridge in the Wentworth's kitchen. So let's have a look on the table. How did they preserve their foods? Now, one way is pickling. And here we have some of the handmade pickle foods that the servants would have worked on in this kitchen. We have capsicums here that have been pickled, and also we have onions, pickled onions, and these would have been pickled with salts or vinegar. It helps them last longer. What's another way that we have here on the table? The other thing we have here is things that have been dried. Another way of preserving. We have here some spices that have been dried so they can last all year round, not just when they're fresh from the garden. Now, the last thing I want to show you before we leave the kitchen is this mystery object. Do any of you know what this is? Let's go back to the studio and see if we can work out what this is.
All right, so we might use the chat so that we can, I can see what you're thinking. So the first thing, I can see Vamika does know about that mystery object. So we will talk about that first, if you like. This mystery object is something, now this technology we still use today. Put up your, we can say people are saying it's a bowl and a spoon, and it's sort of like a spoon. That's true. But what goes in this this is called a mortar and pestle. I can see that Aprel's got that right and Bernie's got that right. He's saying it in there. Now, what goes in this? What do you use this for? How do you use it? Because it looks like a bowl and a spoon, but it's not quite that. Does anyone know? Do any of you want to put in the chat, what do you put in a mortar and pestle? Some of you should grind. Vamika knows what she's talking about exactly. You put things in here now. In different cultures, people put different things. Yeah, I can see Bernie saying spices, and that's correct. You do put dried spices, like maybe mixed herbs or basil or salt or, That's right. You put them in and then you grind it like this, and that way it turns into a powder. Now, people like the Wentworths would have done this so that you could preserve them all year round. But you can also put other wet ingredients in here as well. You might crush nuts, or you might do do other things like chutneys. Exactly. So Vamika knows what she's talking about. Do you have one in your kitchen, Vamika? Quite often, lots of students do. Now, I also asked you the question, you do. So I also asked you the question, what objects were different? What different technologies were being used? For example, the main really interesting one that kept the kitchen warm was what they used to boil water and cook things and heat things. What was the different it wasn't an oven powered by electricity, but what was the thing in the middle of the Vaucluse House kitchen? Exactly, the fireplace, which was really critical technology in that time. Every room would have had a fireplace like that. Were there any other objects that were different from today? What about lighting? How was light created before electric lights were there to switch on? We saw candles, exactly. Did we see anything else? Candles and the window. The window is a really important one, and of course the fire. So I think that was all of them. They also might have had oil lamps, but I don't think we saw them, but they do have them at Vaucluse House. All right, so lots of different technologies in the kitchen. Now, another really big difference was where they got their food from. So today, where do you get your food from? Your fruit and vegetables and all the other meats and so on. Where do you get your food from? Type it into the chat. People are saying Coles. Exactly, that's right. And the shops. Exactly. But we know, and the supermarket. Excellent. Yeah, I can see what's Hamish is saying, the supermarket as well. Exactly. But 160 years ago, that wasn't an option for the Wentworth family. So a lot of their food, they had to have some sort of sustainable strategy to grow it themselves. So let's cross now and have a look at the Wentworth's garden and surrounding plants, and let's see how they got their fruit and vegetables mainly from their own garden. What sorts of things did they grow in their garden and what did they get? So let me cross to a video with my friend Zoe. She's going to show you the garden, which is quite beautiful. Has anyone actually, before I cross to that, has anyone actually been to Vaucluse? Have any of you that I can see? Grace, Emily, no, yes, Lana's been there, but a lot of you haven't. So yeah, it's actually free at the moment if you want to go and visit in Sydney, of course. But let's have a look at the garden now through Zoe. Okay, so let's listen. And the question we're asking here is, what fruit and vegetables can you see? What fruit and vegetables did the Wentworths grow at home? Let's cross to Zoe.
I'm standing behind Vaucluse House in this beautiful vegetable garden. Look, you can see the house right behind me. This is the garden where the Wentworth servants would have grown all the vegetables for the Wentworth's meals, but also for the servants' meals as well. So the vegetables that they were growing in this garden were seasonal, which meant that they could only grow certain vegetables in certain seasons. Right behind me, you can see a really big zucchini patch right here. Let's go have a look and see what other vegetables the Wentworths were growing here. I'm standing here in a strawberry patch, but as you can see, there's not a lot of strawberries growing in this patch, and that's because we're in early autumn. Now, when springtime comes along, there's going to be lots and lots of strawberries growing on all these plants here. Now, the servants would collect those strawberries, and so the Wentworths could enjoy strawberries all year round. They would make strawberry jam, just like we saw in the kitchen with the other preserved vegetables. Strawberry jam was a way of preserving the strawberries so that they could enjoy strawberries all year round. Some plants were grown because they were useful and not just for eating. So this plant here is called Feverfew. It's a little bit like chamomile. People in the past would have grown this to help with tummy aches or headaches. They would brew it into a tea like chamomile. All those plants we saw in the kitchen garden were plants that were brought to Australia from all around the world. Before the Wentworths started living here, this area would have been filled with bushland, and you can still see a lot of bushland around Vaucluse House today. The Aboriginal people who lived on this land and continue to live on this land are called the Gadigal people. The Gadi people would have known all about the native plants that grew in this area, like this tree behind me. This is a lily-pilly tree, or Tacoba, and these tiny purpley pink berries could be taken straight off the tree and eaten. They were nutritious and delicious, and they were also seasonal.
Okay, so what I can see there's a bit happening in the, okay, I can see a lot of answers there in the Q&A. So a lot of you are using the Q&A. Let's have a look at it. So the question that was being asked was, what is growing in the Wentworth's garden? Now, Byron had a lot of comments that he wrote throughout, and Byron saw zucchinis, exactly, and those enormous pumpkins. I love the pumpkins in the Vaucluse House garden. April is seeing the strawberries, exactly, as Zoe said. There weren't many yet, but there will be soon when it comes to autumn time. And April noticed as well the pineapples. So unusual, those little pineapples. They start just really small and they get bigger and bigger in the Wentworth's garden. Very unusual for New South Wales to have such successful growing of pineapples. Grace also saw the pumpkins, the strawberries, etc. So such a huge variety. And then also at the end we saw some of those Indigenous plants like the lily pillies that have been grown for thousands of years on the Wentworth's land and make such delicious jams. So what about you? Now that's kind of different for today, in that most of us don't have that kind of range of fruit and vegetables in our garden. But how many of you actually do have your own veggie patch at home? Grace has lots of trees where she is, yes. So we still have a lot of those native trees. And do others... does anyone else have veggies at home? Yeah, Bernie grows herbs, exactly. Yeah, so Hamish does as well, and Lachlan, so quite a lot of you do. So yeah, a lot of things, though, a lot of technologies might have changed. A lot of things are still the same, and we still do grow, lots of us still do grow herbs and veggies at home. April grows pumpkins and herbs, exactly. So another thing that that was really different, of course, and someone mentioned this before, I can't remember who, someone said, it was Emily and Oliver said, in fact, a lot of their food comes from the fridge. But of course, that technology hasn't been invented yet 160 years ago when the Wentworths lived at Vaucluse. So they had to come up with different strategies to try to keep their food cold that would have been in the fridge. So let's cross back to another little video. This one's me in the dairy, and we will have a look at how they did that. And I'm going to do a little quiz with you afterwards about what strategies were they using, what techniques were they using in order to keep their food cold before the invention of the fridge and the use of electricity. Okay, so I'm crossing back to a video that I'm sharing with you. Okay, let's have a look at this. This one's really short. It's 1 minute.
160 years ago, there were no fridges. As we said before, because electricity hasn't been invented yet, but the Wentworths were very clever. They actually built a cool room, and I'm standing in that cool room now. It was called the dairy because they kept all their dairy foods here that needed to be kept cool, things like milk, butter and cheese. Now let's look around since we're in the dairy and try to work out, how did the Wentworths keep it cool? Well, there are a number of things that you might notice. Firstly, can you see that it's quite dark here? They've put the room on the shady side of the house. They've also dug the room underground. So when we walk in, we actually go down a set of stairs, and that keeps it cool. They've also made the room of stone. So these benches, when I touch them, they feel really cool because the stone keeps cool, and all the walls are made of stone as well. And the last way was very clever. They actually used mesh. If I bend down, there's a big hole here in the side covered in mesh, and that's bringing in cool air into the dairy from underground. And if we look up at the top walls, there's mesh there too to take the hot air that rises outside.
All right, so there's a few questions in the Q&A. A few questions about the plants. How many plants were there in the garden? That's a pretty good question. I don't know the answer. Like, I don't have a number, but I'd say there would be over 100 different different plants in that garden. It's a really enormous garden. And Emmanuel said, what is mesh? So mesh is a little crisscross of wire so that breeze could travel through. So mesh was used both at the bottom and at the top of the dairy so that there could be a flow of air throughout and would keep the whole place cooler. All right, so what I'm going to do is a little quiz to see if you had a look at what were the strategies prior to electricity that the Wentworths used to keep that room cool. How did they keep it cool? Now, I'm going to ask you to put in the chat if you think these things were true or false. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to give you some statements and you're going to say, are they true or false? Okay. So here's the first one. You need to tell me in the chat if it's true or false. The Wentworths' dairy was kept cool by making all the walls and benches out of stone. Is that true or false? Oh, well done, Emmanuel, Emily, they know the answer. April, exactly. We're getting lots of people. Grace, Bernie, Valentine, excellent. You are all, Lana, you're all right. It is, of course, true. That is exactly what they did. They didn't use wood. Plastic, of course, hasn't been invented yet, but they used stone. It kept it all much cooler. That was one strategy to keep the room cool. Next, is this true or false? Fresh air was brought into the dairy using fans. Is that true? Was it brought in using... Vamika does not think so. Emmanuel doesn't think so. I think you're on the right track, guys. Of course, they didn't use fans. That would be too labour intensive prior to the use of electricity. They didn't use that. They used something else. So let's keep going and see what did they use so that fresh air could come through. We mentioned that before. Let's have a look at this. This was another strategy. Is this true or false? That the dairy was positioned to get lots of sunlight so the servants could see what they were doing. Do you think the cool room wanted to be positioned to get lots of sunlight? No, I think Abby and Pip think that it's false. Famika thinks false. Yes, you are all right. Emmanuel's going with false. You're right. Of course, they do want some sunlight, but not in the dairy. The dairy they positioned, we saw that arrow when we looked at the drone footage of Vaucluse House. They wanted to put it in the shady part of the house. That was one of the ways they kept it, more than 10 degrees cooler than all the other rooms in the house. What about this? Is this true or false? Did they build the dairy slightly underground to keep it nice and cool? Is that true? Yes. April thinks so. Emily and Oliver think so. Yes, you're all right. Lana, Emmanuel, yes. All of you are right. That's actually what they did. You saw that picture of me walking down the stairs. So 160 years ago, families did build, if they could, they built either a small box area or, if they were as wealthy as the Wentworths, a whole room underground to keep it all cool. So in all those ways, they managed to keep their dairy from going off a little bit longer. Nothing compared to a fridge, but at least it was better than just leaving it in a hot kitchen where we know there was that big fire. Now, another really interesting thing that they did that many people don't do anymore, because we can just buy our butter from the shop, like you said before, we don't know how to do it ourselves. But of course, the Wentworths just made it themselves. So let's have a look at what Zoe shows us about how to make butter so that you can have a go of that after this session. So Emmanuel's saying special ingredients. Guess what? There's only one thing that goes into making butter. Have a look at this. Have a look at this video and Zoe will tell us.
In the past, when the Wentworths lived here at Vaucluse House,
Sorry, guys.
dairy foods would have been an important part of their diet, like milk and cheese. Just like we know today, milk and cheese and dairy foods is really important to keeping our bones healthy and strong. But there's one more dairy food that the Wentworths would have eaten a lot of, and that is butter. Okay, so the servants would have made butter right here in this kitchen using only cream and this butter churn. So the servants would go out to the cows and milk the cows in the morning. Then they would separate the cream from the milk and simply pour the cream into the big butter churn like this. Then using this handle, they would move the paddles like this for a long time until that cream turns into butter. Then the servants would use these wooden paddles and scoop the butter out of the butter churn and have it ready for Mr. and Mrs. Wentworth's breakfast. Okay. Now, making butter in your own kitchens at home is actually really easy. All you need is a jar with a lid and a rubber bouncy ball. You'll also need some cream, just some cream you can buy from the supermarket. You'll also need a bowl, a sieve, a spoon, a knife, and of course some fresh bread. Okay. Now, to make butter, first of all, what you need to do is go wash your hands. Okay, so washing your hands for 20 seconds. Then you put the bouncy ball into the jar, just like that. And then you're going to pour the cream into the jar, just up until the top of the bouncy ball. Okay, you don't need any more cream than that. Then you need to put the lid onto the jar. Okay, make sure it's nice and tight. Okay, maybe you can get an adult to help you with this. Then, using 2 hands, you're going to shake. Shake like that. You're going to need to use your muscles as you shake the cream in the jar. Now, it's going to take a few minutes and it's going to get really tough to shake, but you need to shake it over and over and over again until the cream separates into butter and buttermilk. All right, so this one is just about to turn into butter. Okay, can you hear that? All right, now this one, we have butter. All right, so if I open this, we can see that the cream has now been turned into butter, and that liquid sloshing about in there, that's buttermilk. Okay, so then this is where we use the sieve and the bowl to get our butter out of the jar. You might want to use a spoon to help us scoop the butter. Put it on a plate. All right, lovely. So now you have delicious fresh butter made by yourself in your kitchen at home. All right, well done everyone. Enjoy.
Okay, so we have a couple of comments. So all you need, of course, is the cream. So people said, let's have a look at some of the questions you had. So why were there some gaps in the paddles? So, yeah, the gaps in the paddles, both the gaps in the paddles of the butter churn that they used 160 years ago and the bouncy ball are there to increase the agitation. So you could just shake a container with the cream in, but you'll be shaking for a lot longer than if you put something in it, like the paddles with the holes or the bouncy ball. That way it agitates faster. So Zoe probably only shook that small jar for about 5 minutes, but a big butter churn that had the paddles, you would probably have to go for at least half an hour of turning the paddles over and over again. So it takes quite a long time. But all you need to do it at home is those things that Zoe said, the cream and the bouncy ball and a little old jam jar that you might have washed in the dishwasher so that it's sterile. So are there any questions? Should you wash the bouncy ball first? Yeah, lots of kids actually ask that, and some said, do you not take the bouncy ball out first? And of course, yes, do. Wash the bouncy ball and also take it out before you eat the butter. Someone said, Emma was saying, can I just use milk if I don't have cream? No, you can't do that. You'll have to buy a container of cream, but when you do it and it separates into the yellow butter, you'll have this delicious buttermilk as well. So you'll get milk from the cream that you can then use for cooking or something. They sell buttermilk as well in the shops. All right, before we say goodbye, because our time, we've got 1 minute left before the session sort of ends, but does anyone have any other questions about technology in the past or the Wentworths? I can see that Emmanuel was really interested if they had other pets. Another really beautiful building that we didn't show you was actually the stables. So the Wentworths did have other animals. A lot of the free settlers and early people in the colony of New South Wales had animals that were brought from Europe, so cows and horses and so on. So, yeah, they did have animals and chickens and goats. The Wentworths had all those animals. So if there's, I'll just check if there's any other questions. I'm loving, thank you for all the nice messages, like the thank you. It's a pleasure, April. So it's a pleasure. So people were also interested. I mentioned to you that our museum is free. So, yeah, at the moment, the Australian Museum's free, the Art Gallery's free, and Sydney Living Museums is free for the whole of the financial year till next July. So it's free to go to Vaucluse House. We're open every weekend. So if you live in Sydney, you could do that. And all our other museums are free as well, except the Hyde Park Barracks, where there's a small reduced cost. But you can go to Museum of Sydney, Elizabeth Farm, and see all of our museums for free. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, all of you, for coming today. You've come up with some great questions, and I really hope that you enjoy using a technology from the past and making your own butter after the session at home, and you will find it is quite delicious. So enjoy, everyone.
Thank you so much for that, Naomi. It was absolutely fascinating. I'm absolutely going to make some butter at home, and I'm going to try to find some buttermilk recipes to make some muffins or something afterwards. I might even try to find something, maybe some herbs in my garden to add as well. And I've got chicken, so maybe I can use some fresh chicken eggs.
You've got so many options.
To make that. But it's so important to remember that reflecting on the past and thinking about how things were done is a really important part. You know, one of the science areas called archaeology, and certainly Sydney Living Museums does a lot of work around that area, especially like things like Hyde Park Barracks as well. There's been some amazing discoveries that tell us so much about our past, that helps out our story for the future as well. So thank you so much for that. Everyone's had a wonderful time, and I really look forward to seeing you all again. We've got trivia on in about half an hour. If you haven't registered and you'd like to join, send me an email at virtualexcursionsaustralia@gmail.com and I can send you the link. Tomorrow we have Australian National Maritime Museum with ocean science. We've got our lunchtime trivia, and at 4 o'clock they've got a really special ocean science trivia as well. So lots more things to do for SciFest and National Science Week, and thank you once again for joining us, and a big thanks to Naomi as well.
Oh, thanks, Karen. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Bye, all of you. Thanks for the great questions.
Thanks.